Well, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits website. Thank you so much. We're excited to have you join us. Before we get going, Christian, what's wrong? You look like you're crying
I,
over
I
there.
just had, I just had the worst draft.
You had a bad draft?
Okay, so maybe I didn't have a bad draft. I guess only the time will tell once the season starts, but that's what this video is about. It's very easy to hang your head when you have a bad draft. You ever just finish your draft, and we all do, especially in our first few years of playing fantasy football. I know I did. You look back at the draft, and you're like, wow, my team really sucks. I need some help. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, how to overcome a bad draft. And the first thing that I want to say before we get started is it can be done. If you have a bad draft, don't quit. Keep in the waiver wire, keep active, keep doing things, but keep grinding. It can happen. In fact, Rob, I know you weren't ready to talk about this, but I think you have a prime example last year of somebody who probably would have quit in your position, but you didn't, and you end up winning the league. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I was going to talk about it in my notes. I felt like I had a great team. Yahoo said I had the best draft. I was ready to just roll over everybody, and I started 2-5, and it's a keeper league. And I was actually at the point when I considered, maybe I trade for the future. Maybe I build my team for next season. But I wanted to give them one more shot. I dug in my heels. I made moves. I worked up. I went from 2-5, won the rest of my games, and I rolled through the playoffs, won the championship. And so don't quit. Don't give up. Okay.
All right, well, sorry for taking
That's
your
all right.
notes, but why don't you get us started here?
Okay, so we're going to talk about ways that you can overcome a bad draft, okay? How do you overcome a bad draft? Well, here's the first point, and the first way you overcome a bad draft. First, you have to admit that you have a problem.
That's like the first step in alcoholism recovery, right?
That's number one for AA, step one. Admit you have a problem. You know what? If you sucked, you sucked. Just own it. And I don't know how many times I've seen people where they have a questionable draft and they're trying to convince themselves it was a good draft. The best thing to do at that point is put aside your emotions, your feelings, see it for what it is. If you had a bad draft, it happens. Maybe you were distracted. I don't know. Maybe you're at the bar drinking too many beers. But the bottom line is you need to own it. You got to own it. So don't be that guy who's in a 12-team league who just did his draft and his starting running backs are Gore and Perkins and he's telling you what great backs he has. I love Gore. Great running back. Been around the league for a long time, but he's old. And Perkins got a lot of upside, but he's young. But if those are your two starting backs, you're in trouble. You need some help. So don't panic. Once again, Christian, you mentioned earlier, I started 2-5 last year and ended up winning all my games. So going back to where Christian's at, don't give up. Take this attitude. Live to fight another day. If you can just get that week to week, anything can change. Anything. So anything you want to add, Christian?
Yeah, you mentioned don't panic, and panicking is kind of my Achilles heel in fantasy football. It's what I do. I get a good team together, I get in line, I think I'm set up, and then I panic, and I kind of outmove myself sometimes.
Yeah.
I make too many trades, I make too many drops and pickups, and a lot of times I end up letting go a lot of talent. And this is something that it's easier said than done, but don't panic. Before you make moves, ask someone you can trust. Is this a good move for me, really? Take time. If you're going to make a trade, wait an extra day. If you're going to, drop a guy, maybe wait an extra day. If you're in that situation and you feel like you might be panicking, just slow down. The less moves you make, the better.
Yeah.
So that's a lesson I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah. And then here's the other thing, too. Do whatever you can, squeak in the playoffs. If you're 7-6, whatever you got to do to get here, so what? I've seen so many leagues where the best team doesn't win the championship. In fact, last 2 years I was in some leagues where there's a couple teams that literally limped into the postseason. They had a ton of injuries. They weren't great. They barely made it in. They got into tiebreakers. But they got in, they got hot. And so once again, that can happen. But there are 3 easy things that we feel like you can do to overcome a bad draft. And we want to share those with you now. Are you ready, Christian?
Yeah, let's go.
So here's the number one thing you do. Work the waiver wire. Now, once again, last year we talked about it. I started 2-5, okay, but I ended up going on to win the championship and I actually ended up with the most points in the league. Now, I look back at last year and it keeps track of how many moves every team makes. There's 12 teams in the league, right? So I had the most moves last year. I made 105 moves. Now, you need to understand we start individual defensive players, and so we have a pretty deep team and bench. But once again, I made 105 moves. The second most moves were 55 moves. So I had double the amount of everybody else. But here's what's interesting. Not only have the most moves, but the team that had 55, the second most, they had the best record in the league. So the top 2 teams that finished best in record and won the championship were number 1 and number 2 in moves. Work the waiver wire. Okay? You're 1 weekend away from an injury. Okay, and there's so many times where I see it where a team, and this happened to me one year where I had Bell and Jamal Charles. And so Le'Veon Bell, Jamal Charles, I am set. And I didn't work the waiver wire. I made a mistake. I didn't really build my bench. I thought I am set. In the same weekend, they both went down with injuries. And so you're 1 weekend away from all of a sudden their backup becoming the starter. And if you pick him up, before you know it, you can catapult your team into relevance. And so, once again, don't give up on that. Here's another thing, though, when it comes to waiver wire. Feel free to chime in anytime you want, Christian.
Yeah.
Typically, most leagues, so let's say you have a bad draft, maybe you start the year 1-2, 1-3, or 0-2, you're probably going to get preference in the free agents. Typically, they set it up so the team with the worst record or least points will get number one choice in terms of free agents. So that's always going to work in your behalf. So once again, don't forget that.
Yeah, the waiver wire is so important, and there's something I want to talk about. If you want to go to the next slide at any time, huge thing to remember about the waiver wire is that there's a lot more talent out there than you might think.
Yeah, we're going to get that. I'm going to click and I'll let you speak there. See, I think here's the idea. You have the waiver wire, maybe I can get that bye week fill in, maybe the slightly above average player who has a good week. That's not the case. We're going to give you some examples right now. Once again, work the waiver wire.
So there's a lot of talent out there. Last year, a lot of leagues, Matt Ryan went undrafted in some leagues, and quite a few actually. Dak Prescott did. We were in a keeper league where he's been kept for a few years now, but when he came out and had his first big season and his kind of, welcome to the NFL, he was a waiver wire pickup. He was undrafted.
Yeah.
Same with Victor Cruz many years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, so much talent can come from the waiver wire.
Odell Beckham last year. Your running back that you traded to me.
Ajay,
Yeah.
Howard. Howard was a guy. Now, you drafted him. I remember last year you drafted him and traded him to me, but he was your last pick. Nobody knew about him.
Yeah, I threw him on my bench, my last pick. In a lot of leagues, he was undrafted. He really was. Now, these guys didn't just go out to be above average players. They become dominant fantasy players. There's a lot of talent out there, so don't underestimate that talent level. So, yeah, we go back for years. I think about how many guys have went undrafted. The one thing I think about...
Oh, keep talking. I got a point, but...
Yeah, one of the things I think about, and this is the reason also why when it comes to free agents, the waiver wire, this is important, okay? Be quick on it. Nowadays, with Yahoo and different places that are offered advertising, they're promoting, they're telling other people who to look for, who to pick up. People are a little bit quicker on the gun. They're a little bit quicker to pull the trigger in terms of picking up a free agent. So if there's a guy out there that you have your sights on, be quick. If you wait a week thinking I'll give him one more week to see how he does, you're probably going to miss the boat on that. So that's really key. You have to be very active. In fact, you almost have to be a little bit of a prophet in terms of you got to look ahead a little bit. So if a guy shows even the slightest hint of potential, pull the trigger on that guy because people are really quick nowadays on the free agent market.
The other thing is we're talking about making a lot of moves. To do that, you can't be leaving dead weight on your bench. We're talking about players like when I first came into the league, CJ Spiller was supposed to when I first started playing, CJ Spiller was supposed to be this big player, and I was kind of young, and I kept keeping him on my bench year after year for a couple years in a row, where I just kept thinking he's got to turn out, and he ended up just being dead weight, a spot that I didn't use to get some other talent. Now, this is really important all the time, but it's especially important when you had a bad draft. When you had a bad draft, guys with low ceilings or guys who don't maybe have great star potential or probably don't have the job or whatever it might be, just move on from them. You're better off taking chances on guys who may come out to be the next David Johnson or the next Odell Beckham Jr.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, high ceiling matters at that point.
Yeah, you're right, and this is key. We've said this a few videos, some of the mistakes that people make, but your bench, you should not have a backup quarterback. You should not have a backup kicker, a backup defense, a backup tight end. Your bench should consist of running backs and wideouts. That's it. Once again, it's dead weight. You can deal with backups and bye weeks when that week comes, once again, but don't load your bench with dead weight. That's so important, so important. Here's another key as far as free agents and the waiver wire goes. Be active before the season starts. A lot of leagues right now have already drafted. So they already have their team. And I know a lot of people that draft their team, they feel set, and then they kind of just don't do a whole lot until the season starts. But these next week or so is a great time to look at the waiver wire, see who's out there, upgrade your bench a little bit. Even if it's a slight upgrade is still a upgrade. It's an upgrade. So be active out there. Don't wait till the season starts. Start right now to check this out.
And additionally, we're in the heart of the NFL new season. Things change fast. I mean, we're just talking about Spencer Ware just got hurt. if you're in a league where Kareem Hunt didn't get picked, obviously he has a lot of value now. Go take him. Now I would assume Kareem Hunt is drafted in most leagues, maybe later in the draft. But if he wasn't, I mean, that's a guy you got to snatch on. When something happens at this point before the season starts, it usually has a very big impact. So don't underestimate it.
Yeah, here's a few other things in terms of free agents. I've heard people say this. You can never have too much talent. Here's another reason why you work the waiver wire. Sometimes you're building your bench so that you can make a trade. And I've heard people say, well, yeah, there's a great wideout out there this week. I could have picked him up, but I got 4 good wideouts and I won't need him. Well, 1, you can never have too many.
Yeah.
2, maybe you can trade him. 3, why let him go to another team that you might have to face that guy? You can never have too much talent. Here's another thing. Learn to pick up and grab other teams' handcuff. Like right now, let's say in one league I've got Ezekiel and I've got Bell. Okay, so if I had Hunt on my team, he's probably not going to start after week 6, right? Yeah. But the team right now that doesn't have Hunt, who drafted where? Okay, I could probably parlay that into a nice trade. So grab other people's handcuff. Once again, it's so important. The other thing I'd say, if you're struggling, once again, we're going to offer something on our site to help you out there. But scour the market, build your bench, use free agent, use waiver wires. You can overcome a bad draft. Here's the next thing that we would say in terms of overcoming a bad draft. Learn to play the matchup game. Now, that's not fun. It's great when you can have a stud guy that you can just roll the dice every week, put him out, you know he's going to produce. But you may have to start to play the matchups. In fact, what I have found typically is I've gotten through the years more comfortable playing the matchups when it comes to defenses. In fact, if I don't have a top 5 defense, I pretty much roll matchups all year long, and it's worked really well for me. And so that's something you can do, not just for defenses. You can do that with your quarterback, other positions. Once again, playing the matchups becomes big if you don't have a great team, if you had a bad draft.
The other things, don't underestimate. Matchups really can get the job done. My first year, I came into playing fantasy football, and I just wasn't good, and I had a bad draft, and I wasn't prepared coming into the draft, and I learned quite a bit after, and you were teaching me a lot about playing matchups at that point because I just didn't have starting power, and I made the playoffs going week to week on my quarterback. I know the week before playoffs, I started Chad Henne, I think it was. Terrible quarterback, but if you play the right matchup at the right time, it can work out great for you. You know, every year Brian Hoyer kind of seems to shift teams. He's always playing for a new NFL team. He's always underrated. He's never really considered a franchise quarterback, but you get him on the right week, he can throw 3 touchdowns. Basically, anyone can throw 3 touchdowns. So that's one of those things to remember. There's talent deep down if you're playing your matchups.
Yeah, if you're playing your matchups, in fact, it happens. We have a game that we run here on the Fantasy Football Profits site. It's called Not the Top 20, and what we do is we challenge people. You can put in a lineup for free, and then each week we have a winner, and if you're a winner, your name goes in a hat. At the end of the year, you win a jersey, right? But what we have found is that week after week, you put in a lineup, and they can't be in the top 20 for any position. They have to be below, so it tests your kind of ability to go kind of deep. And what we find oftentimes is that a guy that'll end up in the top for scoring won't be one of your top guys. It'll always be that random guy who had a fluke week, that Kendall Wright who blows up, or a running back who just fills in for a week, Jaquez Rogers. And so, once again, if you play the matchups, you can get a lot of points out of it. In fact, you know what one of the top scoring quarterbacks was the second half of last year?
Colin Kaepernick.
Colin Kaepernick. Another guy, running back, Paul of the Jets. So once again, you can play the matchups really well.
Yeah, that's something. In fact, we were looking into, mostly me, I was looking into some of the fantasy scoring numbers that we had last year, and oftentimes these not top 20, these, bench guys coming out of nowhere, that were being started based on playing matchups, we're outscoring regular fantasy teams because people hold on to biases and start an average running back against a great defense, and of course he doesn't perform, and so that's something to do. Play the matchups. It really works.
It does, yeah. Now, here's the other thing I would say in terms of working the matchups. So let's say if I'm working the matchups, and here's what I have found. Let's say I'm working the matchups, whether I need a bye week replacement or I'm looking for a good matchup a week or two down the road. What I have typically found is I try to forecast ahead a week or two, because what I realize, let's say, I'll give you a prime example. It's going to take 2 to 3 weeks before you're going to understand the trends for this year. Now, we'll look back at last year's rankings. Week 1, week 2, they'll set up the the order as far as best quarterback and so on and whatnot. But the reality is that we won't know until about weeks 2 to 3 this year. But one team that I would feel confident saying that you should start any play that you have against them all the time is the New York Jets. Okay, just start the New York Jets. But let's say I'm thinking, okay, 2 weeks from now, I see that Brian Hoyer's playing the Jets, or what would be an average defense? Let's say maybe a little bit below average. Let's say the Buccaneers, not a great defense, but all right. But they're playing the Jets. Like I would start the Bucs defense against the Jets over any defense right now. Okay,
Yeah.
The Jets are brutal, but you know what? A lot of teams are going to think that way also. So if you're going to play the matchups, you may want to pick that defense, that player up maybe a week ahead of time, not the week of. So once again, you have to forecast a little bit, but play the matchups.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I kind of practice what I preach, so to speak. I usually don't draft a defense. I usually make a defense my last pick and very intentionally go week to week because I know if I draft a defense, I'm not going to keep two defenses on my roster spot at any time. So if I draft a good one, I'm just going to end up dropping him at some point, and so that's useless for me. And it worked well. I remember it was like 2 years ago. It was the same thing, but with Cleveland. Whoever's playing Cleveland, just start them, and they have a great game. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So once again, if you have a bad draft, own it, admit it, work the waiver wire, work the matchups. And here's our final point that you can overcome a bad draft with. Making trades. Now, your league may not allow that, but most leagues nowadays do, and it's a huge way to overcome it. In fact, I've become very active in trades. You become very active in making moves, maybe too active at times.
I'm probably a little bit too active. I've made so many. In one league, I made like 4 trades before we're in a keeper league. I made like 4 trades before I even set my keepers so that I could figure out who I wanted. And I probably overtrade. I do it for fun. Fantasy's fun. I really enjoy trading. But I tell you what, there's always a deal out there. There's always someone willing to make a trade. So if you need to maybe get rid of some depth at running back to get that other wideout you need, or maybe you have a quarterback that's good, but there's an okay one in free agents, you can trade him out and upgrade somewhere else. There's always going to be an option. You just have to look for it. And don't be that guy that offers the ridiculous trade that's like, okay, I'll give you, Isaiah Crowell for David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell. What do you think?
Yeah, there's always that guy.
There's always that guy. Don't be that guy.
Don't waste my time.
There's a fair trade out there that can benefit you.
Yeah. And that's the other thing I would think. When it comes to trades, sometimes it can be hard to pull trades. I'm in a league where basically I have to let myself get ripped off just to make a trade. But here's a couple things to think about when you're trading. If you have 2 players that are about the same or equal kind of value status as far as fantasy goes, the bigger name will carry more trade value. So remember that. Don't be afraid to trade the big names if you need to. You got to trade to get. You got to give to get something. So if 2 players are kind of right on the same level of play, the bigger name player will carry more value in the trade. And don't worry about that. In fact, what I have found, for example, I believe that there's a lot of wide receivers out there that will sneak through. There's always good wide receivers to pick up, and so I don't mind trading a big name wideout if I feel like I need help at running back or another position, because I know that I can probably scour the waiver wire and replace that. So once again, think about that. Another one, a big name quarterback in particular, that's a really easy one to trade because quarterbacks out there's a lot of quality quarterbacks right now that play football in terms of fantasy football. They'll do really well. A couple years ago, we did a stat and said, back in the day, if you had over 30 touchdown passes, that was considered kind of a goal there to reach as far as being a quality quarterback.
You were considered an elite Pro Bowl quarterback. You were considered great.
You really were. And no, a couple years ago, 2015. Now I don't have the stats in front of me, but we looked it up, and I believe it was 12 quarterbacks that made that 30 mark. An additional 3 that would have, except for injuries. One had 29, so you're looking at around 15 or 16. So once again, don't be afraid to trade the big name quarterback. You can always pick a quarterback up. It's one of the easiest positions to play the matchups and to find a free agent out there. Once again, if you got Aaron Rodgers and you had a bad draft, trade Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, trade Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, that's the thing. Quarterbacks really, they carry a lot of weight. Especially in people don't realize a lot of leagues, quarterbacks just don't score that as much as they're considered to. You're better off getting that running back talent. And the other thing is, if you really had a bad draft, one more thing that I want to say is just, if you really had a bad draft, you're just going to have to take some risks and feel fine with that. Take some risks. If you had a bad draft and you try to sit back and play conservative, you're going to conservatively lose every single week, and it's going to be a long and boring year for you. So if you have a bad draft, just go out there, try some new things, be creative, and maybe you'll even learn something. Even if you don't end up recovering, you'll probably learn some information that'll help you in the next year.
Okay. So that's kind of a few things that we have. Once again, don't panic. Admit if you had a bad draft. Work the waiver wire, trades, play the matchup game. You can overcome a bad draft. You can have a great year. You can still win your championship even if you had a bad draft. One of the ways we're going to help you if you have a bad draft and you need help through the year.
Go to the Fantasy Football Profits, that's Profits with an S, at Facebook. You can message us at any time and we'll answer you most likely within the hour. We're fairly good about that. And we'll be excited to have a long conversation about you. If you have any questions about what we do or about your fantasy league, or even if you just want to talk football, we love talking football. Once again, go to the Fantasy Football Profits, Profits with an S, at Facebook. Or you can go to our website, www.fantasyfootballprofits.com. And on our homepage, if you scroll to the bottom, there's a contact button. You can click that and email us.
So once again, we appreciate you joining us. Hope you guys had a good draft. If you had a bad draft, that's okay. Football's right around the corner. We're excited. I can't wait to play some football. Join us in our next video on the Fantasy Football Profits.